welcome back to Weekly Business Podcast by Roohi. So today I'm joined by Danny Miranda. So I wanted to dive deep into, so at 13 years of age, you wrote about Gary Vee. So what was the kind of impact of Gary Vee on your life? And what was your experience like hosting him on your podcast, and kind of how that came full circle for you?
Yeah, thank you for having me. This story is so near and dear to my heart because I'm getting chills just thinking about it, because I'm at the same desk right now, 13, 14 years later, as I was when I wrote my original story about Gary Vee. So basically, I was 13 years old. I was surfing the web, finding what was interesting to me. And I saw this guy from New Jersey. I'm from New York. And I saw him just he had incredible consistency with his content. He was posting 5 times a week. I saw his energy, I saw his passion, and I saw his excitement for what he was doing. And so I wrote a story about him. I wrote a story about, why I thought he was just an interesting content creator, why he was interesting to me. He commented on that blog post. Mind you, it was 2009. So I was really appreciative of that. I mean, he had a decent following at that time, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe a little less. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check. But then it was just like he went to a whole nother level in 2015, 2016. My college friends started to ask me about him. And then, I'm back on Twitter in 2020, 2021. And I'd started the podcast. I was building it up. And I tweeted out, one, that he was a dream guest of mine on the podcast. And two, the blog post itself, I tweeted and said, like, this is the blog post I wrote about Gary Vee in 2009. That blog post ended up getting him. He saw it. He followed me because of it. And I tweeted out that he followed me. And then when I tweeted that, people were saying, you got to go on the podcast. You got to go on the podcast. It was such a magical moment for me, a full circle moment, and just so near and dear to my heart. It was just, euphoria is not the right word to explain it. It was just even more than that. It was so much joy. And I'm so grateful for him making that full circle moment happen. And I'm hopeful that in 10 years or within the next decade, we'll have another full circle moment at an even bigger stage. And we'll see how the journey progresses, because my belief is that wasn't the last time we'll connect.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that from your kind of insight on how you got Gary Vee on your show, I think for the audience themselves, a few big takeaways include things like snowball effect. So as you'd mentioned, like Gary Vee, when you tweeted out that he started following you back, so that was kind of a snowball effect. And also the power of Twitter. So now I wanted to kind of dive deep into Twitter. So how do you use Twitter to get guests onto your show? And what is the kind of outreach? And could you explain the power of asymmetric bets on Twitter and building these kind of opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, Twitter has always been my most natural platform. So I was 13 years old. I had started a blog. How do I get people to check out the blog? I just go on Twitter. And that was like my initial inclination, because I'm a writer at heart and I feel that. So that's one thing to note. Another thing to note is like social media gives you the power to send as many messages as you want to as many people as you want, as many times as you want. And when you really understand this, like at the deepest level, this means that you can tweet to somebody, hypothetically hundreds of times a day and get their attention. Now, I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm saying that the possibility for you to send an email to somebody or you to tweet to somebody, like there are people right now, you're listening to this, someone's listening to this, and they have a person in mind that if they spoke to for 20 minutes would change their life. It would excite them so much and it would bring them so much joy. What is stopping you from reaching out to that person? very little often. Even if it's just a cold message on Instagram, or it's a video message you send to the person directly, or it's a tweet with a video of yourself. Like, there's so many different ways to get creative with it. And it excites me so much about the possibilities. And yeah, I mean, every tweet you put out is an asymmetric bet. Every piece of content you put out is an asymmetric bet. So like, if you know that, why wouldn't you put out more?
Yeah, I think in all of that kind of what you shared, I think the biggest takeaway for me personally was the exponential power of social media and how powerful it can be. And yeah, so I think that was an amazing point. And so now I wanted to kind of dig a bit deep into your mindset in 2018 and now how you're pursuing the highest version of yourself. So I wanted to understand from you, so what kind of prompted this change? The change from your mindset in like 2018 versus like now, and how you're pursuing a high version of yourself.
Yeah. So in 2018, I was I'd graduated college, university, and I wasn't really too content. I was more looking to like see how could I make the most money possible. And that was my number one prerogative. That was my number one thing on my mind. Not like what brings me joy, like what excites me, like how could I just make money? And that works for some people because making money is their joy. And so you have to find out what works for you and what works for you in your life. But for me, when I found out that making money wasn't a pure joy of mine, it wasn't something that I enjoyed for the sake of doing it. And what I did enjoy was, one, becoming the highest version of myself mentally, physically, spiritually. Two, telling people about it. Three, explaining the ways that I was going about doing that. And so you have to realize, as a content creator, as an entrepreneur, as a person in life, like the greatest rewards are going to come from years 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's kind of what my thesis was. And so if I believe that the greatest rewards happen after time, well, it helps then to do something that you find joyful. And you might have to sacrifice years 1, 2, 3, 4. But on the other end of that is more joy, more fulfillment, doing something you love. So my mindset has shifted from the place of let me do things for the sake of making money to let me do things for the sake of finding joy. And the quality of my work, the quality of the connections, the quality of the people in my life have improved so much as a result of that. I mean, everyone's got to figure it out for themselves. And I think that was just my path. So I'm not saying that anyone should follow that, but I'm saying that worked for me. And hopefully somebody could look at that and say like, oh, maybe I don't need to chase money, or maybe chasing money is my purest passion and pursuit. So yeah, just look at yourself, your own situation, try different things, be open, and hopefully you'll find what you find joy and fulfillment from just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, I think you brought up a very excellent point of long-term vision, being very long-term focused, and how your greatest rewards can actually come after some time. So being very mindful about that and also trying to constantly achieve a high version of yourself. I think that's an excellent point and an excellent takeaway for the audience. That's fantastic. So now I wanted to kind of shift. So you had mentioned in your last point about the quality of connection. So I wanted to understand from you. So how do you build your relationships with all these amazing guests that have come onto your show, and how do you sustain that relationship?
Yeah, I was just at the barber shop, and the barber, I told him like Noah Kagan came on the podcast. He runs this $100 million company. And the barber asked me, did you pay him? And I was like, no, I didn't pay him. I haven't paid any of my guests to come on the podcast. I don't plan on paying any guests to come on. It's just about people want to align with people who, going back to what we were talking about before, have long-term vision and long-term intent, right? If I asked Noah Kagan on the podcast probably 9 months ago, and he said, nah, sorry, I'm busy. I'm focused on my YouTube channel. Well, now I ask him again in 2022, early 2022, he's like, yeah, like, why not? Like, I've seen Danny Miranda before. He asked me 6 months ago. I see what he's doing on Twitter. I see him building himself up. And so it comes down to realizing that if you ask somebody in May of 2022, they might not respond or connect or want to be on your podcast or be on your show or connect with you until 2024 or 2027. And that's cool. I'm completely content with that. And the reason why I'm content with that is because finally found something that I want to do for a long time. And so, how do you build connections? For me, it's like we were talking about before, taking a lot of shots, to being and looking at where your curiosity naturally lies. I love reading. I love entrepreneurs. I love technology. I love psychology. I love so many different things. So I'm going to reach out to those people who inspire me, who I'm excited by. And if they want to connect with me, great. If they don't, also great. I'm content either way. And then how do you make sure that you connect with that person? You can't really be 100% sure, but one way I like to do it is to really give them value in the conversation. So if somebody agrees to come on my podcast, I like to ask them deep, thoughtful questions like you're doing that really let them know that I really care about them and that I really want I want to bring them joy from the conversation itself. And so I think I do that pretty well. The guests seem to think so. And so that leads me to have a connection with them because they know that I valued their time enough to research their story and go deep with them where other interviewers sometimes don't.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I actually just wanted to ask you. So I saw somewhere, I think in your own tweet, you had said that you do a lot of research. And I read somewhere that you did about 6 hours plus research for Noah Kagan's interview. So you're very research oriented. And I think that's why you have a knack for interviewing. So I wanted to ask you any frameworks and process behind preparing for your interviews?
The framework and process for me at this current juncture is listen and watch and read as much as I possibly can and pull out the insights and the parts of the person's story that are interesting to me in particular. And so, I mean, it's nothing more than just brute force and just time, right? So I'll go through somebody's tweets. A useful hack or tool is to use Twemex, which is a Google Chrome extension. That's Twemex. And that allows you to see the most popular tweets. You could also use advanced Twitter search. That's one way. You could also go to the 7th page of Google for searching the person's name. You could also check their old blog posts or reach out to somebody who that person is connected to. You could do so much as an interviewer and to really get an edge. And one thing I love is to just listen to old podcasts of the person. And this serves two purposes. One purpose is you get to research the guest. Another purpose for me is I get to see different podcast styles. Oh, I liked how this person did this. I like how that person did that. So I've probably listened to hundreds or thousands of hours of podcasts just in the past 2 years. And I've been able to learn from every interviewer. It would be like, if you want to be a great writer, read a bunch of books. If you want to be a great YouTuber, watch a bunch of YouTube videos. If you want to be a great podcaster, listen to a bunch of podcasts. And that information will get trickled down to you even in your subconscious. So yeah, that's a little bit about how I do my research. And I just love the process of learning about somebody, going deep on their story, and being able to show them love in the form of my questions, to be able to show them, look, like I really care about you. And so that's really exciting to me.
You had a very powerful point at the end, show them love in the form of the questions. So I wanted to ask you, so what types of questions should one be asking in an interview, and how to kind of dig a bit deeper? Any question starters you can share with the audience today?
Yeah, I mean, how do you dig a bit deeper? The best way to dig deeper is to ask why. This is Larry King's favorite question. Just WYH. Why do you do that? Like, what's going on? Like, going beneath the surface level answer asking why. Another thing that Andrew Warner does is he kind of interrupts people, and when he interrupts people, he just uses the word because. Like, you did this because you like. So those two are helpful. Another way to go deeper with somebody is to really listen to them and to ask questions about what they just said in a way that shows them you really listen and care. And if you're comfortable with not knowing where the conversation or interview is going to go, I think that really shows a level of just trust in what's going on and what's happening. And so the times in my life when I've been so attached to the research that I've done, it's led me to not be as present in the moment. And it's not created a beautiful conversation. It just created a research type of thing. And I think one thing that happened with Noah Kagan was I had all this research for him. I'd done 16 plus hours for him, and I didn't actually use a lot of the things that we talked about. And afterwards, when I showed him my research sheet, he said, "We didn't talk about any of this." And I said, "That's exactly right, because we found more interesting things to talk about in the conversation." And he felt loved. He felt appreciated because we talked about the things that were on his mind at that time, not necessarily what I wanted to talk about going into the conversation. Now, we did talk a lot about what I wanted to go into the conversation, but it was a beautiful balance of research and spontaneity. And that just created the most joy for me and him, I think, in that moment.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think you made a very great point on being comfortable with not having any idea where the conversation flows. So just being in the moment, being present, being mindful. And so now that takes me to my next question, which is, so how do you be more mindful? How do you kind of achieve this mindful and spiritualness? And yeah, anything you can share for that?
I think for me, what's helped me be more mindful is to meditate, to take walks, to really stop at any moment in my day and be like, yo, this is crazy. I'm living a human experience right now. Like, this is wild. Like, look around. Like, there's a computer here. I can connect with millions of people on the internet. Like, I'm just enjoying this moment of getting my hair cut. I'm just like talking to a microphone. Like, if you really, the best way to be mindful is just to stop and admire and acknowledge what's going on in the present moment. Like, if you actually did that, that would lead to more mindfulness. And so I think a lot of times in the conversations that I have, when I really do it well, it's because I'm mindful of the moment of being like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, I remember before I left for Noah Kagan's house, not to make this whole episode about Noah, but this was the first time I'd really gone to someone's house to do an in-person interview. And before I go, I'm like, this is crazy. Like, how wild is it that Noah Kagan was just somebody who I admired online 2 years ago, and today he's somebody who I'm going to interview at his house. So just that thought made me more mindful. And so the ways I practice that is meditation, like 20 minutes in the morning. And it just helps me get in touch with a deeper essence of who I really am. And it just helps me just bring more gratitude and more just love to each and every moment.
Point that resonated with me as well was acknowledging that you're living in the present moment and acknowledging the power of the internet, the power of these connections that you can have with the internet. So my next kind of question was, now how do you raise the consciousness of humanity? So what's your kind of take on that?
Yeah. So this is a massive goal for myself. But massive goals require massive action and inspire me and get me out of bed in the morning and excite me. And raising the consciousness of humanity for me, I'm currently doing it through my podcasts and tweets and just posts. And it's like asking myself, how can I bring a little more love to this situation? If that that could be as simple as like being more present. That could be as simple as just doing something extra for the person that I'm speaking to. Like raising the consciousness of humanity to me is about just being a better person. And it really excites me, that goal. It excites me because it allows me to dream about a world in which people meditate instead of party, or a world in which people care about each other and love their neighbor as opposed to like not knowing what they're up to. And so, yeah, just an exciting goal for me. And there's no way really to quantify it, at least in this present moment. But it's just like, am I leaving this moment with more joy and love and optimism versus the one that came before? Yeah, it excites me because I know what life is like with a lower level of consciousness. I know what life can be like when, you're depressed, you don't want to get out of bed, you're not excited. And I see that sometimes when just communicating with random people, or talking to random people. And I feel as if I can bring some more joy to the conversation of life. And I feel like I can bring some optimism and I can bring some love. And so, because of that, I want to give it. And it's important to me because I felt the opposite end of this spectrum. I felt the depression. I felt the, the, the just way of being that is not fulfilling to you in any given moment. So, because of that, I just want to spread more love, spread more joy. And that's really my mission.
Purpose and a fantastic mission. And I wanted to ask you, so you've interviewed dozens of inspiring and amazing people on your show. So what are the kind of maybe top three things you have learned from any of your guests that you've hosted?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I learned from Gary Vee that I think about a lot is don't overestimate, don't underestimate the importance of the early parts of your career in terms of the ROI. Everybody is curious about the return on investment of putting out a podcast or starting a YouTube channel or starting a TikTok. And instead of thinking about that, think about what you're going to learn from the process of doing it. And think about the connections and the people you might meet. And think about who you're going to become as a result of doing what you're doing. Gary Vee would not be Gary Vee if he didn't spend 5 years of Wine Library TV posting 5 times a week of wine reviews. Like he wouldn't be the person we know today if it wasn't for that. And so I think that if I extrapolate that to my development, it's like I've been posting podcasts now for a year and a half. Well, that's nothing. And I haven't made any money as a result of doing the podcast. But the reason why I'm doing it is not to make money. It's because the connections, the rooms that it's gotten me in is incredible and it's exciting. And so it doesn't just apply to podcasting. It's also about whatever form of content you do. It's like the type of person you become as a result of doing it is worth way more than the amount of money you could potentially gain, especially in the early going. And so that's been the biggest one. Another lesson that I've learned is just like the energy and excitement people get from doing the thing that lights them up is priceless. And it's kind of similar to what we were talking about before, but I've spoken to so many different people who have found joy and purpose and fulfillment doing something that they love, and that the excitement that brings is just extraordinary. So yeah, that's the biggest lesson that I've learned from doing what I've done.
Any advice you could share for 18 to 20-year-olds? And what's next for the Danny Miranda podcast?
So my advice for 18 to 20-year-olds is to really key in on what excites you. And that's like, what's the last few things that you bought on Amazon, or what's the last book you read, or what's the last tweet that really got you thinking, or what's the last YouTube video you watched just for the sake of watching it. a lot of times we don't want to do that thing that excites us because we're scared of what other people will think, and we're told we're not supposed to do that. And it's not something that other people approve of. But if you can forget the opinions of others for 1 second and really key in on what brings you fulfillment just for the sake of doing it, you will live a more exciting life. You'll live a more passionate and energetic life. You'll be more filled with enthusiasm. More connections will come to you. So that's my advice to the younger version of myself, is like, look for where you find excitement and potentially double down on that. What's next for the Danny Miranda podcast? Hopefully more incredible guests, hopefully more in-person episodes, a lot of online episodes too, but just try to continue my growth as an interviewer, as a content creator, as just somebody who's spreading joy and enthusiasm and love into the world. And yeah, just keep on keeping on, because it's such an exciting journey for me so far. So just want to keep that going and just continue living my highest version every day.